There are two kinds of people in the world, the colonizers and the colonized.
Nope. There are people that believe in human rights and equality, and those that don't. Placing this issue in any other context is an attempt to dehumanize people and excuse the atrocities committed in the name of greed and bigotry. The fact that you defend genocide and exploitation says a lot about you.
At least according to the left, which in recent years has labeled all of history's victors the unjust beneficiaries of settler colonialism.
Calling out injustices isn't new, and it isn't reserved for the left. While the left, as you like to call us, is the primary voice to dissent from the profiteering war machine, there are people on the right that agree with us. Remember those damn Nazis in Germany that wanted to colonize the world? There were quite a few people on the right that thought they should be stopped as well. Or perhaps you've heard of General Smedley Butler, a hero that was ironically recruited by the right to lead a coup against FDR. He famously reported the attempt to overthrow the government and expose right-wing fascists, only to have Congress cover up the details to protect those wealthy capitalist traitors like J.P. Morgan Jr., Irene DuPont, and Robert Sterling Clark. Arms were to be supplied to the traitors by Remington, so if you own guns, this is a good reason not to own a Remington. Before this, Butler spent many years faithfully serving America in wars only to see the devastating result as the corporate exploitation of conquered lands decimated the native populations.
This pejorative phrase has cropped up everywhere the left dominates. The universities, the media, even the government.
If the left dominated the government, Israel would not have the unwavering support of America. There wouldn't be around 750 U.S. military bases in over 80 countries, and the military-industrial complex wouldn't take 15% of our budget. The left hardly dominates the media. Nazis are celebrated on Twitter while left-wing journalists are shut down. The right has newspapers, radio shows, and websites, the same as the left. The right takes on the victimhood role to bolster their persecution narrative and deflect from any attempt to hold them accountable for spreading hatred and bigotry. The universities are actively shutting down left-wing protesters as we speak, all part of the protect the colonizers at any cost approach used to shut down criticism of an apartheid state occupation enabled by the United States.
Its purpose is to delegitimize every Western country that the left doesn't like.
No, it is to call out human rights violations and hold people accountable. See, unlike the right, we believe in equality. People should not be exploited for financial gain. That is the purpose of colonization.
America, Britain, Spain, Portugal, France, Israel, and so on.
Gotta make sure to get the number one ally in the evangelicals' apocalyptic religious fantasy in there.
But the phrase doesn't mean all that much when you consider that every single regime and tribal society in history was established by settlers and colonizers of one kind or another.
Since human history is filled with war, conquest, and subjugation, we shouldn't oppose colonization. It is a long-held tradition, and to speak out against such injustices is to delegitimize our own existence. We must embrace our primitive roots and war with our neighbors. Control of land and resources should be treated like a sport. This is how humans should live. Fuck progress. Thanks, Prager.
To put it another way, not since Adam in the Garden of Eden has any people sprouted out of the ground. And in the case of Adam, you might recall, he had a little help.
Time to shoehorn in your religion and pretend like atrocities committed in the name of your religion are justified by an invisible and undetectable sky fairy. No one has ever sprouted out of the ground. It is ridiculous that an adult thinks this is true. It is even more ridiculous that they would mention this fantasy while attempting to make a point about geopolitics. I simply can't take anyone seriously that would subscribe to such childish fables.
Borders, nations, and regimes have changed for all of history as people have multiplied, expanded, and moved around.
That's quite the oversimplification, but go on.
The aim of the decolonization activists is to return land from the people who currently possess it to the people who previously possessed it. But that doesn't solve the problem. It only pushes the problem one step back in time.
No, the aim is to respect the laws that we have established to determine ownership and sovereignty. Current laws, especially international, were created to solve this very issue of more powerful nations colonizing weaker nations. We can only address the issue of colonization from the point at which we had laws in place to prevent a people's right to sovereignty from being trampled upon. Propaganda U would like you to believe that this creates an infinite regression that creates more problems than it solves. But this simply ignores a well-documented history of international treaties and laws.
In 1980, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the American government had illegally taken the Black Hills of South Dakota, the site of Mount Rushmore, from the Lakota Sioux.
It is a fact that the land was taken from the Lakota. In 1868, the United States had signed a treaty that reserved the Black Hills as part of the Great Sioux Reservation. The United States legally recognized the land as belonging to the Lakota. I guess Michael doesn't think that the United States should honor its word.
The court ordered the government to pay the Lakota the initial offering price of the land, plus interest. But even the liberal court did not order the U.S. to vacate and give the land back to the Indians. How could it? 250,000 Americans live there.
The court's decision to not force settlers to leave isn't justification for the illegal actions allowed and encouraged by the United States. This decision came 100 years after the settlers invaded looking for gold. A decision to respect the treaty should have come immediately, but obviously it did not. This is a strategy of colonizers to kick the can down the road so as to change the landscape of the issue and create a dilemma that now involves the forced removal of a people. It is ironic that they would argue against restoring land rights because it would involve the same method of removing people that was used to illegally take the land to begin with. This is being played out right now before our eyes in the Israeli and Palestinian conflict.
In any case, the Sioux refused the money. And it's a lucky thing, because the payment would raise just as many problems as it would solve.
No, it wouldn't. We have clear legal treaties that establish ownership that was recognized by the United States. We have a clear point to move forward from, and this dishonest shill is ignoring the facts of history to push his imperialist agenda.
Because the Sioux did not magically sprout out of the Black Hills. In fact, the Sioux possessed the Black Hills for less time than the United States has.
That's really not a flex. The treaty making the Black Hills part of the Great Sioux Reservation was signed in 1868, and the invasion and takeover by the settlers was conducted between 1874 and concluded in 1877. The United States had double-crossed the Lakota in less than a decade after it was discovered that their reservation contained gold.
The Sioux took the land from the Cheyenne in the late 18th century. If the U.S. is going to pay the immediate previous owners of the land, shouldn't the Sioux pay the Cheyenne? And shouldn't the Cheyenne pay the Kiowa and the Crow who owned the land prior to the Cheyenne? And what about the Comanche and the Arapaho, both of whom claimed the territory before the Kiowa and the Crow, who lost it to the Cheyenne, who lost it to the Lakota, who lost it to the U.S.?
Propaganda U is now reverting back to the infinite regression argument because they have no tenable position, all the while ignoring the fact that the United States violated an established treaty they had signed into law themselves.
And how exactly are we supposed to decolonize the Black Hills?
You are going to have to buy out the settlers and force them to move.
Even if we could identify the right tribe, is there even anyone around today who could seriously claim ownership 10 generations later? Is there any statute of limitations here?
Yes, Mikey. It's all right there in the Treaty of 1868. You can look it up if you don't believe me.
Until about 75 years ago, everyone recognized the right of conquest. If you took land and could hold it long enough, it was yours.
That's not true. International treaties were signed to protect sovereignty, and nations infringing on this were not excused from honoring because of their right to conquest, as you call it.
Then, liberal utopians convinced themselves that they could outlaw human nature.
Translation: the world decided that we needed a system to resolve conflicts that was peaceful and prevented imperialists from taking anything they wanted. Wow, what a crazy liberal idea. How ridiculous of us to try to make the world a better place by outlawing hostile takeovers and subjugation. What's next, liberals? No more raping?
But they couldn't. People continued to grow, explore, and conquer.
Grow, explore, and conquer is feel-good euphemisms that look to rewrite history, paint atrocities as heroic, and downplay the genocide and exploitation of imperialism.
And why do they do it? The decolonization activists will tell you the answer is plunder, material gain.
That is the primary motive. As we have already talked about, the Black Hills were taken from the Lakota for gold. Resources have always been one of the primary reasons to attack other people and take over their land. If the land and people didn't have something of value, why would they waste their time fighting for it?
Yes, one motivation of many Western colonizers was wealth. But it was not the only one. They were frequently motivated by higher ideals as well.
By higher ideals, he means the right religion, or more specifically, his religion.
The proof is that most of them not only didn't get rich, but were personally impoverished for their efforts. The Pilgrims of the Mayflower gave up lives of relative comfort to settle in America, and half of them died in the attempt.
What is it, Mikey? The Pilgrims left comfort to further utopian ideas? Or they were persecuted and sought religious freedom? The right-wing narrative changes so often I can't keep up.
George Washington lost much of his net worth during the Revolutionary War. Thomas Jefferson died a debtor as a consequence of his many years in public service.
Two people do not represent the state of colonization, and explaining their personal finances has little to do with why America was colonized. The original colonies were all under the direction of governors that came to America to profit. Their power was given to them by the crown, and they were expected to make England wealthy by plundering resources. I don't know why Michael is unaware of this most basic fact about America's founding.
Even those who proudly referred to themselves as conquistadors, the men leftists call thieves and plunderers, were often motivated by higher ideals, specifically to spread faith in God and the adoption of biblical morality.
The motives of the conquistadors was riches and glory for the Spanish Empire. Spreading the faith was less of an interest than justifying their subjugation of the natives. Upon landing, the requerimiento was read to locals to inform them that the Spanish had divine right to rule over them, and any resistance was an affront to God's will, which gave the Spanish the right to not only take from them as they wish, but to kill anyone that didn't acquiesce to their new position as slaves. It is not like the Spanish came in and mixed with the locals and invited them to church as Mikey would have you believe.
5 years before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Aztec Empire, which itself had conquered any number of tribes, sacrificed tens of thousands of victims to their patron demon over the course of just 4 days.
Just 14 years before Columbus sailed the oceans blue, the Spanish Inquisition began. After another round of especially brutal pogroms in 1391 against the Jews, Christians were unsatisfied with the results of their forced conversion that also saw thousands killed or expelled. The loving Christians sought to ensure that the correct version of Christianity was being practiced, and so their reign of terror became the law of the land for the next 3.5 centuries. Hundreds of thousands of Jews and Christians were expelled, while all of their possessions were taken from them. These were the fortunate ones, as thousands more were tortured and killed.
Hernán Cortés witnessed these sorts of sacrifices when he arrived in 1521 at the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Aztec priests sliced open the chests of sacrificial victims and offered their still beating hearts as a sacrifice to the demons before kicking their dead bodies down the steps of the temple. Happily, Cortés conquered the Aztecs, stopped the human sacrifice, and introduced the natives to Christianity.
The Inquisition spread to the colonies of Spain and saw the torture and killing of thousands of new converts that had been forced into Christianity. You know, the ones that Michael said they saved from the Aztecs.
Those who oppose human sacrifice, and I hope you include yourself in that group, must consider this an unambiguously positive development.
I'm not sure what the moral difference is between murdering people as part of a religious ceremony or murdering people for not practicing the religion you were forced under threat of death into adopting. I'm sure there is some fine nuance there that Michael could clear up if he just had the opportunity.
This is not to say that Western colonizers didn't commit their share of crimes. They certainly did. It is to say that not all colonization is equal. Some forms are better than others.
Translation: murdering people in the name of Jesus is okay, other religions, not so much.
So here's a useful thought experiment. Who would you rather be colonized by? Christians or Aztecs?
What the fuck is the difference? How terrible is your religion's history if you have to compare the atrocities of human sacrifice to make your religion seem better? There is no lesser of two evils here. Both cultures practice abhorrent rituals that resulted in the brutal torture and death of thousands. The mental gymnastics engaged in by Mikey in this video to excuse colonizing people and exploiting them is mind-bending. There are no links Christian nationalists won't go to defend the barbaric and inhumane history of their religion. What is the lesson here? Genocide and enslavement by Christians is not quite as bad as being sacrificed by the Aztecs? If you could choose a group of people to invade your land, rape and murder your family before taking your possessions and assimilating your children, there's no one better than a Christian? I don't know how these sick fucks think this is an endorsement. The mind of religious zealots is the closest thing to evil that exists.